There's a line on every hospital consent form that asks for your relationship to the patient: mother, father, legal guardian, other. I have filled out that line 1,000 times in my career, on behalf of children who were not mine, and it has never once made my hand shake. It made my hand shake 3 weeks ago, standing outside room 412 at 11 at night, because the box I needed to check, the box that would let me legally continue treating the boy inside that room, sat 2 inches below a name I recognized instantly, printed in the parent guardian of record field above mine. Byron Calhoun. 20 years ago, that name ended my career before it had properly started. He sat across from a hospital review board and told them I had done something I never did, and he did it so calmly that not one person in that room doubted him. I built my whole life back from the wreckage of that lie, and now his 7-year-old son was asleep on the other side of that door, wired to a monitor that kept skipping a beat it shouldn't have skipped, and somehow, impossibly, I was the only doctor in that hospital he would let touch him. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Renee Winters. I'm 43 years old. I'm a pediatrician, and for 11 years, I've run the cardiology service at a children's hospital in Louisville, Kentucky, because a long time ago, a man decided he would rather ruin me than admit a mistake he made. I never expected to see him again. I certainly never expected to be standing in a hallway, wondering whether I could, in good conscience, keep treating his child. Was Byron Calhoun really as sick and as sorry as he looked? Or was this one more performance from a man who had made a career out of performances? Why did his son flinch every time an adult raised their voice? And why did that same little boy reach for my hand before he reached for his own father's? And the question that followed me home every night that month, the one I couldn't say out loud to my husband or to anyone, was whether I could save this child without letting his father back into the part of my life he had already taken so much from. I need to take you back 20 years to a hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I was finishing my fellowship in pediatric cardiology under a man named Dr. Byron Calhoun. He was, by every outward measure, brilliant, the kind of attending physician whose name opened doors, whose research got funded without question, whose opinion in a room ended arguments before they started. Residents used to say his signature on a recommendation letter was worth more than 3 years of your own work. I was 23 years old, exhausted in the specific way only a fellow in their final year can be exhausted, living on vending machine coffee and the belief that if I just worked hard enough, long enough, quietly enough, someone like him would eventually see me as more than a placeholder in his rotation. I trusted him the way you trust anyone standing above you, holding your entire future in their hands. Because at 23, I didn't yet understand that a person can hold your future and still choose, without hesitating, to drop it. That winter, he was treating his own niece, a baby girl, barely 4 months old, admitted for what looked like a routine arrhythmia. I remember the fluorescent hum of the on-call room at 2 in the morning. I remember the chart and the dosing calculation he read out loud to me, half a question and half a command, and I remember thinking, even half asleep on my feet, that the number sounded wrong for her weight, too aggressive by a margin that mattered. I said so, carefully, the way a fellow learns to say things to an attending without sounding like she's arguing. He told me I was tired and I should trust 30 years of experience over my own math. I wanted, more than almost anything in my life up to that point, to be wrong. 6 hours later, that baby went into cardiac arrest in front of both of us. She survived, barely, but she spent 3 weeks in the pediatric ICU on a ventilator, and nobody outside that family ever learned exactly why, because the file that eventually explained it to anyone was the one Byron Calhoun rewrote. What I didn't know, standing in that room that night, with my hands still shaking from the code, was that Byron Calhoun was up for department chair in 11 weeks, and an internal review of a near-fatal dosing error on his own family member would have ended that vote before it ever began. So he did the only thing that made sense to a man who had spent 30 years believing his own certainty was a form of proof. He rewrote the story, carefully, the way only someone who has read 100 malpractice files knows how to rewrite one. The chart that eventually reached the hospital's review board did not say he miscalculated a dose against my objection. It said the opposite, that I had overridden his correct order in the middle of the night, that I had made the error, that I had endangered a 4-month-old child out of what he called, in his own handwritten statement, reckless overconfidence in a first-year fellow's judgment. He used my own careful, respectful phrasing from that night and twisted the order of it until it read like insubordination. I sat in front of that review board in a borrowed blazer that didn't quite fit and told the truth, plainly, the way my mother raised me to tell it, and it did not matter, because the truth was my word against the word of a man they had trusted for 3 decades and I had worked under for exactly 11 months. I watched 4 senior physicians nod along to his version of that night like it was scripture. I was suspended from clinical duties for 11 months. My fellowship funding was pulled without an appeal hearing. The research position I'd been promised at a hospital in Atlanta, the one my whole career plan had quietly been built around since my 2nd year of medical school, disappeared without a phone call. I simply stopped getting return calls, the way you learn an entire door has closed only by how long the silence lasts on the other side of it. It took me 6 years of working under direct supervision, proving myself one attending at a time, before anyone let me touch a cardiology patient again without someone standing over my shoulder, and I did every one of those 6 years without ever once being told I was owed an apology. I built a marriage during those 6 years, which still feels, looking back, like the one thing that lie didn't manage to take from me. I met my husband, Nathaniel, in the middle of that long rebuilding, and he watched me cry in our kitchen more nights than I ever told him I was grateful for. Watched me practice, out loud, arguments I never got to make to that review board, long after the board had already closed the file. By the time our daughter Nora was born, I had earned back my full board certification. By the time our son, Elijah, came along 8 years later, I was running my own cardiology service at a respected children's hospital, and Byron Calhoun was a name I had trained myself not to think about. A locked door in a house I otherwise loved living in, one I walked past every single day without ever quite forgetting it was there. I never imagined that door would open again in a hospital corridor in Louisville, Kentucky, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, because a 7-year-old boy with his father's same pale gray eyes was being wheeled past the nurse's station toward a room on my floor. I didn't recognize Byron Calhoun at first. 20 years does that to a person. It had taken the black out of his hair entirely, and it had taken something else too. some quality of certainty he used to carry into every room like a second coat. He was thinner, almost frail, in a way that didn't match my memory of him at all. He walked with the careful, deliberate steps of a man managing his own heart failure, one hand always near a wall or a rail, pausing at the doorway to catch a breath before he'd let himself speak. It was only when he said my name, quietly, like he wasn't sure he had the right to say it at all, that I understood who was standing in front of me on my own floor. "Dr. Winters," he said, "I didn't know you were here." I had a boy behind him in a wheelchair, small for 7, with dark circles under those same pale gray eyes, clutching a stuffed rabbit, missing one ear against his chest, like it was the only steady thing left in his life. My mind was doing 2 things at once, running the clinical picture I could already half read off his color, his breathing, the faint blue tinge at his lips, and replaying, at the exact same time, a hearing room in Charlotte I hadn't let myself picture in over a decade. I felt my pulse in my own ears before I felt anything else. "This is my son," Byron said, and something in the way he said the word son sounded like a man handing over the only thing he had left of value. "Judah, the cardiologist in Nashville sent us here, said Cardinal Grove has the best pediatric arrhythmia service in 3 states. He paused, and for a moment, I watched him actually look at me, fully, for the first time in 20 years. I didn't know that meant you. I could have transferred the case within the hour. Every reasonable argument existed for doing exactly that. The conflict of interest was not subtle, and no one on my staff would have questioned it if I'd handed Judah Calhoun to one of my partners and walked away with my professional distance fully intact. I had built an entire life on the discipline of walking away from things that could hurt me twice. I opened my mouth to say exactly that. And then Judah looked up at me, past his father's shoulder, with the flat, exhausted patience of a child who has already been examined by too many strangers in too many hospitals, and said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Are you going to listen to my heart too?" Something in the specific, tired courage of that question stopped me cold. I told myself it was only for the initial workup. I told myself I would hand him off the moment another cardiologist had properly reviewed the file, that I was simply being professional, not sentimental. I examined him that first afternoon and found exactly what the Nashville team had already flagged in their transfer notes: an intermittent, dangerous arrhythmia that didn't respond cleanly to the standard first-line medication, episodes that spiked without clear triggers, and a family history section on his intake form that was strangely, almost suspiciously, bare, 3 blank lines where a normal chart would carry at least some inherited detail. "Any history of cardiac issues on either side of the family?" I asked Byron directly, pen already against the page. He hesitated half a second too long, his eyes sliding toward the window instead of toward me. "Not that I'm aware of," he said. I wrote it down anyway, because I had no proof otherwise, only the old, unpleasant instinct of a woman who had once caught this exact man rewriting a chart to say something other than the truth. I told myself, that first week, that the instinct was old grief talking, not clinical judgment, that I was letting 20-year-old anger color a straightforward case. I was wrong about which one it actually was, and it very nearly cost his son everything. Over the next several days, Judah's rhythm grew more unstable, not less, and the standard medication protocol that should have controlled it instead seemed to provoke it further. spiking his heart rate into dangerous territory twice in one night alone. My attending resident flagged the pattern to me at 2 in the morning, the same hour, I noted privately, with a chill I didn't share with anyone, that another dosing conversation had gone wrong in another hospital 2 decades earlier. I stood outside his door reviewing labs under the buzzing hallway light, and Byron Calhoun came and stood beside me, uninvited, saying my name like an apology he didn't yet know how to finish. "I know what you must think of me," he said quietly, his voice thinner than I remembered it, worn down by something more than age. "I'm not thinking about you," I told him, which was, that particular night, almost entirely true. "I'm thinking about him." He nodded slowly, and for the first time in 20 years, I watched Byron Calhoun look like a man who understood exactly how small his apologies actually were against what he'd done, and, though I didn't know it yet, exactly how much bigger his silence still was than either of us realized. I went home that night and stood in Elijah's doorway longer than usual, watching my own 8-year-old sleep with the specific, uncomplicated peace of a child who has never once had to wonder if the next person in the room will stay. I thought about Judah's rabbit missing an ear, and the way he'd asked if I was going to listen to his heart too, like he already expected the answer to be no. I told Nathaniel that night only that I had a difficult case on the floor. I did not tell him whose son it was. Some doors, I was still telling myself, could stay shut a little longer. Judah's father was rarely in the room. I want to be fair about why. Byron Calhoun's own heart was failing, class 3, and worsening, and every visit clearly cost him something physical he was trying not to show his son. I watched him grip the doorframe more than once on his way out, waiting until he thought no one could see him catch his breath. But there was more to his absence than illness, and it took me almost 2 weeks of watching before I understood what. Judah's mother, Marisol, had died in a car accident a little over 2 years earlier, and in the time since, Byron had raised his son largely through housekeepers, a rotating cast of sitters, and long stretches of silence he mistook for stability. Judah didn't cry when his father left the room. He'd stopped expecting anyone to stay long enough for it to matter, and there is a particular, quiet devastation in watching a 7-year-old accept that as simply the shape of his life. I found myself staying instead, not as a plan. I want to be honest about that, because nothing about this began as a plan, and if you had told me the first week that I would spend part of my evenings sitting beside Byron Calhoun's son, I would have told you that you didn't know me at all. I stayed one extra half hour on a Tuesday, because Judah was frightened of a blood draw, and asked, in a voice too small for a 7-year-old, if I would hold his hand instead of the nurse. I stayed an extra hour on a Thursday, because his monitor alarmed twice in one night, and he wouldn't calm down for anyone else, wouldn't let the on-call resident near him until I'd been paged in from home, in my coat, still smelling like my own kitchen. By the second week, I was the name he asked for at shift change, the first question out of his mouth to any nurse who walked through his door. By the third week, my own daughter, Nora, asked me at dinner why I kept coming home so late, and my son, Elijah, wanted to know if the boy in the hospital had a mom of his own, and I didn't have an answer for either of them that made complete sense even to myself. Nathaniel didn't push me about it, not at first, though I could feel him watching me some nights, the way you watch someone carrying something heavy up a flight of stairs, waiting to see if they'll ask for help before you offer it. And what I found in that boy's chart next was worse than anyone had prepared me for, But before we go further, if this story already has you hooked, drop a like and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. I went looking, eventually, for the family cardiac history that Byron had told me, twice now, did not exist. I want to say I went looking purely out of clinical necessity, and mostly that's true. Judah's arrhythmia had a shape to it, a pattern of triggers and responses that reminded me of something specific from years of training, a rare inherited channelopathy that runs in families and that responds dangerously to the exact class of medication we had already given him twice. But I also went looking because some old, unhealed part of me wanted proof of something I couldn't yet name, some confirmation that the man standing in my hallway apologizing to me was still, underneath it, the same man who had once decided my whole career was an acceptable cost for his own comfort. I called an old colleague from my fellowship days, a woman named Dr. Constance Tarver, who was now chief of staff at the very Charlotte hospital where Byron and I had once worked together, and asked her, carefully, keeping my voice steadier than I felt, if any pediatric cardiac records from that department might still exist from 20 years ago. She told me most paper charts from that era had been digitized or destroyed years back, but that one department, out of an old habit nobody had ever corrected, kept microfiche backups of anything tied to an internal review board case. Byron's niece's case had been tied to an internal review. Mine had been tied to that same review, on the other side of the ledger. For 3 days, I convinced myself this was simply due diligence, that I was pulling an old record purely to check for a hereditary pattern, nothing more, nothing personal. I told my nurse, Odessa Vance, only that I was waiting on an old file from out of state for a differential diagnosis. I didn't tell her whose name was attached to it, and she was kind enough, or perceptive enough, not to ask why my hands weren't quite steady when I said it. I found myself, more than once during those 3 days, suspecting Byron of something worse than simple negligence, wondering, at 2 a.m, with Nathaniel asleep beside me, whether his sudden reappearance in my life, his visible guilt, his careful, halting apologies in that family lounge, were simply another performance, one more calculated move from a man who had once shown me exactly how convincingly he could lie when his own comfort was at stake. I was certain, for almost a full week, that whatever he was hiding was for his own protection, the same as it had always been 20 years ago, and that his son's illness was simply the newest stage he'd found to perform his careful, practiced regret on. I was wrong about that, and the record from Charlotte, when it finally arrived, told me exactly how wrong I had been to assume the worst of him one more time before I let myself hear him out. Meanwhile, Judah kept a folded square of paper under his pillow that he wouldn't show anyone, not the nurses, not his father, not me. I noticed it on my second week of evening rounds and said nothing, because children in long hospitalizations often keep small private things, and I've learned not to take those things from them, no matter how curious they make me. But twice I saw him unfold it at night when he thought no one was watching, read whatever was written there in the dim light of his monitor, and fold it carefully back into a perfect small square before sleep took him. Whatever it was, it mattered to him more than anything else in that room, more than the rabbit missing its ear, more than the tablet his father brought him that he barely touched. I filed the question away without an answer, the way you file away anything you suspect will matter later, and went back to the numbers on his chart, which mattered in a more immediate way that week. By the 3rd week, Judah's condition had not improved. His color was worse some mornings than others. a grayish undertone around his lips that made my own chest tighten every time I walked into that room. Byron came to the hospital less, not more, arriving some afternoons only long enough to sit in a chair by the window without speaking, and when I finally confronted him about it in the family lounge one evening, worn thin from exhaustion and old anger both, I said something I hadn't planned to say out loud. "You don't get to disappear on this child the way you disappeared on the truth 20 years ago." The words landed harder than I intended, and for a moment, I regretted them, watching him flinch like I'd struck him somewhere already tender. He didn't argue with me, though. He sat down slowly, the way sick men sit down, easing himself into the chair like his own spine might not hold the weight, and he said, I know exactly what I did to you, Dr. Winters. I have known it every single day since, whether you believe that or not. And I think the reason I can't stay in that room very long is that every time I look at my son, I'm afraid of what's actually wrong with him, and I'm afraid of what it means that I might be the only person alive who knows why. Something in the careful, specific way he said, "Why? Not what, but why?" Caught in my chest like a hook, I asked him what he meant. He looked at his own hands for a long moment, the same hands that had once signed a statement that cost me 6 years of my life, and said only, "Give me a little more time. I need to be sure before I say it out loud." That was the first time he told me the truth was coming. It was not, yet, the truth itself, and I went home that night furious at him, in a way I hadn't let myself be furious in years, not for what he'd done to me 2 decades earlier, but for what his silence might still be costing his own son, in the present tense, in real time, while a monitor kept skipping a beat it shouldn't have been skipping. A microfiche file arrived from Charlotte on a Friday evening, scanned and emailed by Dr. Tarver with a short note. Renee found it, buried in a review board archive box nobody had opened in years. Some of this may be hard to read. Call me after. I read it alone in my office, after Nathaniel had already put both kids to bed without me, the hospital quiet around me in that particular late-night way that makes every sound feel too loud, and what I found rewrote 20 years of my own history in about 4 minutes. The original chart, the real one, before Byron altered the copy submitted to the review board, documented the true sequence exactly the way I remembered living it, in language close enough to my own memory that my hands went cold reading it. My objection to the dose, recorded almost verbatim, his insistence, overriding me, the arrest that followed 6 hours later, time-stamped to the minute. But it documented something else too, buried 3 pages deeper, in a section marked confidential, something Byron had never told the board, never told his own family, and had apparently never told anyone at all, until the moment his own son's heart began doing the same frightening, irregular thing his niece's heart had done 20 years earlier in that same unit. The baby hadn't simply suffered a dosing complication that night. She carried an inherited arrhythmia syndrome, a rare, specific channelopathy that runs in families and that reacts dangerously, unpredictably, to the very class of medication Byron had ordered for her. He had missed it, and not, I understood now, because he was careless in the reckless way he'd accused me of being in his own falsified statement. He missed it because, at the time, almost no facility screened routinely for it in infants, and the one piece of information that would have flagged it immediately His own family's documented history of sudden cardiac events across 3 generations was something he had never disclosed to a single colleague in 30 years of practice, because an older, private shame in his own family had made that history something to be buried, not studied, long before I ever set foot in his fellowship program. He blamed me that night, not only to save a department chair vote, though that fear was real and immediate. He blamed me because the true explanation would have required him to admit, publicly, in front of the same board that was about to elevate him, a hereditary condition his own family had spent 2 generations hiding out of an old, misguided kind of pride, and it was easier, in the exhausted, frightened logic of that one specific night, to sacrifice a 23-year-old fellow's entire reputation than to open that particular door even a crack. I confronted him with the file the next morning, in the family lounge, my hands shaking in a way I hadn't let them shake in 20 years, the printed pages trembling slightly, even as I held them flat against the table between us. He didn't deny a single word of it. He didn't even try. "It's in my blood," he said, and for the first time since I'd known him, across 2 decades and 2 very different versions of the same man, his voice broke completely. It skipped my niece's generation in most of the family, thank God, but it didn't skip Judah. I have spent every single day of his life terrified of exactly this moment, and too much of a coward to say the word out loud to a single doctor, including you, because saying it meant admitting, out loud, finally, what I did to you 20 years ago, to keep it hidden the first time. I told myself if I never said the word again, it would stay buried with everything else. I asked him, then, the only question that actually mattered, my voice steadier than I felt. "Does anyone currently treating your son know this? Anyone at all?" "No," he said, and something in his face collapsed entirely, the last of whatever composure he'd been holding on to for 3 weeks, finally giving way. "You're the only person alive I've ever told the whole truth to." Marisol knew there was something in the family, some vague old story, but I never told her the specifics, because by the time I met her, I'd convinced myself the danger had passed us by. That single piece of missing history changed everything about how we needed to treat Judah, immediately and urgently. The medication we had already given him twice on the standard protocol was, for this specific inherited syndrome, actively dangerous rather than merely ineffective, and without the correct diagnosis on record anywhere in any hospital system, my own team had been one more prescription away from repeating, on his son, in a different decade and a different state, the exact clinical mistake Byron Calhoun had spent 20 years and 1 destroyed career trying to bury. I sat with that fact for a long moment in the family lounge, turning the old pages over in my hands, and felt something shift in me that I hadn't expected. This was not the confirmation of malice I had half braced myself to find. It was worse, in its own way, and stranger, an old fear, inherited and unspoken, that had cost 2 people in 2 different decades pieces of their lives simply because one frightened man had decided silence was safer than the truth, twice, in 2 entirely different rooms, 20 years apart. I understood, finally, that the man across from me had not spent 20 years hiding from me. He had spent 20 years hiding from this exact conversation, the one where his own child's survival would force the truth out of him, whether he was ready or not. And no amount of careful apology in a hospital hallway could have prepared either of us for how it actually arrived, or for how quietly, once it finally did, the whole weight of it settled between us. We changed Judah's entire treatment plan within 6 hours of that conversation, based on a genetic panel I ordered that same afternoon and a cardiology consult I paged in from a specialist 2 states away who had published on exactly this syndrome. By that evening, the panel confirmed what the old file had already told me was true. His arrhythmia responded, almost immediately, to the correct protocol, the one that should have been documented in a hospital record 20 years ago, and instead had been buried, page by page, in a lie meant to protect one man's career and one family's old, misplaced sense of shame. Within 4 days, his rhythm was stable enough for a graduated discharge plan. Within 2 weeks, he was well enough to go home, color returned to his face in a way that made one of my own nurses cry quietly at the station when she saw him walk out under his own strength for the first time. Byron Calhoun did not live to see his son's next birthday. His own heart failure progressed quickly in the months after Judah's discharge, faster than even I had expected, and he died that autumn, at home, with a hospice nurse beside him, and, at his own quiet request, a single letter addressed to me sitting unsent on his nightstand. His sister, Judah's aunt, the same baby girl from 20 years earlier, now a grown woman with children of her own, brought it to me herself, sitting across from me in my office with a careful, apologetic steadiness that reminded me, uncomfortably, of her brother in his better moments. She offered an apology of her own for a silence she said her family had carried for far too long, longer than she'd ever fully understood until that final year. The letter did not ask me to forgive him. It asked me, in his own uneven handwriting, weaker toward the end of the page, to make sure Judah never grew up not knowing the truth about his own heart, in every sense of that phrase, the medical sense, and the other one. I have not decided whether what I feel is forgiveness. Some days it feels close to that word. Other days, it feels like something smaller and more practical. An understanding that a man can do something unforgivable and still, decades later, do one true thing that saves the very child that lie once endangered by proxy. I've decided I don't need to have that word fully settled to have done the right thing by a 7-year-old boy who deserved so much better than the family history he almost inherited in silence, the way his father almost let him inherit it. The folded paper under his pillow, I finally learned, wasn't a letter to his mother, the way I had quietly assumed for weeks. It was a list, written in careful, uneven 7-year-old handwriting and added to almost nightly, of every single person who had stayed in his room past visiting hours during his long admission. My name was on it 4 times before his father's name appeared even once. He showed it to me himself the week before he was discharged, without my ever asking or even hinting that I'd noticed it, and told me, very seriously, that he'd wanted a record of who actually showed up, in case he ever forgot. Judah calls me Mom now, sometimes, without correcting himself, and without anyone around him correcting him either. His aunt, the woman raising him now, alongside a rotation of home nursing care for his ongoing condition, has never once asked him to stop, and has told me, more than once, that she thinks he's earned the right to call whoever kept him alive, whatever word feels true to him. I don't know exactly what I am to that little boy, and I've stopped needing a tidy word for it. I know, with complete certainty, what I'm not, the woman his father once tried to convince a review board I was. I spent 20 years letting that lie live quietly, in a locked room, in my own head, dusted but never opened. It took a 7-year-old with his father's pale gray eyes and a stuffed rabbit missing one ear to finally, gently, take that whole room apart. I filed a formal petition with the state medical board 6 weeks after Byron's funeral, not out of anger, though some of it was certainly still that, but because a false record from 20 years ago was still sitting somewhere in an archive, still technically part of my professional history, still capable of following me into rooms I hadn't even walked into yet. Dr. Tarver testified on my behalf. The board's decision, when it finally came, formally struck the original findings from my file and replaced them with the truth Byron had confessed to me in that family lounge, notarized and witnessed before he died. It changed nothing about the 6 years I'd already lived through. It changed everything about the ones still ahead of me, and about what my own children will eventually be able to read about their mother, should they ever go looking. Nathaniel cried when I told him, more than I did, and asked me why I'd never told him the full weight of what those years had cost me. I told him the truth, that I hadn't fully understood it myself until a dying man finally handed it back to me. 20 years too late to matter for me, but exactly in time to matter for his son, and that some debts, it turns out, get repaid in the strangest currency imaginable. A stranger's own child, calling you by the one name you never expected to hear from him, in a voice that had no idea what that name once cost you to earn, and had no idea, either, that it was ever seriously in question whether you would earn that name back at all, after everything that name had once been used to take from you. I still think about that consent form sometimes, the line asking my relationship to the patient, and how long my pen hovered over it before I finally wrote the truth. I think about how easy it would have been to transfer that case the very first afternoon, sign the paperwork, and walk away with my professional distance fully intact, and how glad I am, most days, that I didn't take the easier road available to me. I don't know if Byron Calhoun deserved the extra months he got to watch his son heal before his own heart finally gave out. I know his son deserved every one of them, and more than that, deserved the truth his father was too afraid to give him for 20 years. A truth that, in the end, may have saved his life by only a matter of days. I want to know what you think, honestly, because I still ask myself this some nights, and I don't have a clean answer. Would you have kept treating that child, knowing exactly what his father had done to you decades earlier? Or would you have walked away and let someone else carry a weight that wasn't technically yours to carry anymore? There's no simple answer here, and I'm not interested in pretending there is one. Just to close this story neatly, if this episode moved you even a little, do me a favor and hit that like button before you go. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who might need to hear it. Leave a comment telling me where in the world you're watching this from tonight. I read every single one myself, and it means far more to me than you'd probably guess sitting on the other side of that screen. Share this with someone who'd understand exactly why I chose to stay in that room instead of walking out. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next in my life. And subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because my story is far from finished. There's another chapter waiting for you, and I promise you, it will surprise you just as much as this one did, maybe more. Until then, take care of the people who actually show up for you, in whatever form that shows up takes. Sometimes they're not the people you expected at all, and sometimes forgiveness looks less like a feeling and more like simply doing the next right thing anyway.